Welcome to the mysterious casebook. Tonight, step into the fog-veiled streets of London where a velvet curtain hides a single crimson truth. This is Sherlock Holmes and the blood on the theatre curtain. Now pour yourself something warm and let the mystery begin. The soft knock was oddly theatrical, 3 raps evenly timed, like the cue before a stage curtain lifts. Holmes, seated cross-legged upon the hearthrug, didn't move. He had been still for the better part of an hour, his eyes half-lidded, his fingers steepled just beneath his nose. The violin lay untouched beside him, its strings quivering slightly from the draught that crept in under the sill. I closed my medical journal and rose. The knock repeated, more urgently this time, then ceased entirely, followed by a faint sound, the rustle of paper against wood. "Holmes," I said, already crossing the room. "There's something under the door," he murmured, not opening his eyes. Slipped quickly, but with enough care to ensure its discovery. Black-edged envelope, scented, mid-grade perfume, jasmine base, likely torn from a woman's stationery. Age over 30. Emotional state contained panic. I stared at him. He had not turned an inch. Bending, I retrieved the envelope and opened it with some difficulty. The contents were written in a hurried but graceful hand. "Read it aloud," Holmes instructed. "Mr. Holmes, there has been an incident at the Theatre Royal in Soho. A man is dead, though no one speaks of murder. They have locked the curtain and hidden the truth. Please come quickly. I cannot say more. In writing, a friend of the stage." I looked up. Holmes's eyes were now fully open, fixed on mine with a brightness that sent a ripple of energy through the room. "Well," I said, "that certainly meets your threshold for intrigue." Holmes stood, dusting invisible ash from his trousers. Theatre Royal, Soho, the oldest boards in London, and just now, the scene of either drama or deception. "Shall I fetch a cab?" "No," he said, already reaching for his coat. "We'll walk. I need the sound of footfalls. It helps me think." The street outside was unusually quiet for late afternoon. As we walked, Holmes kept pace with the rhythm of passing hoofbeats, occasionally matching his stride to their cadence. I recognized this mind was arranging something. "The letter was written in haste," he said, "but with care not to blot or strike through. That is discipline under pressure, an actress perhaps, but note the indirectness, a friend of the stage, not from the stage. That tells us she is not herself a performer. Wardrobe mistress, prompter, no, too low in hierarchy. Likely a manager's assistant, someone with both access and reason to stay hidden." "But what has occurred?" I asked. "A man dead, and no talk of murder?" "Which makes it murder, of course," Holmes said grimly. "A death the company wishes to preserve as an illusion, either to avoid scandal or, more interestingly, to protect someone." We turned down Dean Street, where the looming facade of the Theatre Royal came into view, an ornate front, though dulled by years of soot and scandal. A police constable stood outside, arms folded, his expression one of wearied neutrality. "Evening, sir," he said. "Closed performance?" Holmes offered him a narrow smile. "Sherlock Holmes, Dr. Watson, we've been invited." The name worked its usual magic. The constable's eyebrows lifted. "Ah, then you'd best see Miss Armitage. She's inside." He opened the door, and we stepped into the darkness of the theatre's lobby. It was cold inside, far colder than the street. A hush hung over the space, broken only by a faint creaking the kind old buildings make when trying to forget a recent trauma. The scent of grease paint lingered faintly beneath something sharper lacquer. "Blood?" Holmes halted. "Hear that? A faint rhythmic sound like canvas brushing canvas." The stage curtain. He moved quickly now, sweeping past the ticket counter and through the velvet-draped doors into the theatre proper. I followed, adjusting to the gloom as we passed into the main hall. The footlights were cold, but a single gas lamp had been left burning on the stage's far side. There, at the very centre of the proscenium arch, a tall woman stood near the edge of the curtain. She was pale, her hair coiled in a severe bun, her eyes reed-rimmed but dry. "Miss Armitage?" Holmes asked. She inclined her head. "You came quickly. You left a compelling note." She hesitated, then stepped forward. "It's Mr. Lionel Fitz. He was playing Lear. Collapsed during Act 5. They said it was his heart, but it wasn't." "What makes you say that?" I asked gently. "Because," she said, and her voice trembled, "when they carried him behind the curtain, I saw his sleeve. There was blood soaking through it, a jagged tear like a wound. No heart gives you that." Holmes turned slowly toward the curtain. "You've not disturbed the scene?" he asked. "No one has. They wouldn't let the body be taken, said it would ruin tonight's matinee." Holmes approached the edge of the stage and drew the curtain back with one finger. I stepped closer. The body of Lionel Fitz lay crumpled in a heap, half in costume. His crown of papier-mâché had fallen to one side. But what struck me most forget was the long, dark smear trailing down the rear of the velvet curtain. A swath of red. Holmes's hand rose slightly. "There," he said quietly. "Our first false stage," and the gaslight flickered once, like the soft beat of a closing line. Holmes crouched by the body, his gloved hand hovering a mere inch from the red stain on the velvet. "Curious," he murmured. "This is not a spatter but a brush, a long, deliberate stroke." I descended a few steps to the orchestra pit and stood just below him. Could it have come from the victim himself? Perhaps he stumbled, sorry. Observing the angle, Holmes gestured without touching the fabric. The smear descends vertically, then curves inward. A man collapsing does not paint a curtain. Someone moved him after the wound was inflicted and placed him deliberately so the blood would touch the velvet, or worse, so it would be seen. Miss Armitage clasped her hands. "You think it was staged, a message?" Holmes rose, a gesture, possibly theatrical in intent, certainly emotional in design. Whoever committed this murder knew their audience. I noted the peculiar pallor of Fitz's face. "There's not as much blood as I'd expect." Holmes knelt again, carefully peeling back the actor's torn sleeve. Beneath it, high on the arm, was a wound long, deep, and oddly serrated. "Knife?" I asked. Holmes shook his head. "No blade I know. This is irregular, almost clawed." Miss Armitage made a small noise in her throat. "Clawed?" Holmes looked up. "Tell me, Miss Armitage, who had access to this side of the curtain before the death?" "Only the crew, and the cast, of course." Mr. Fitz was alone during the change between scenes. He always took his moment of silence before the final monologue. "And the house manager?" "He was at the front, ushering in latecomers." Holmes turned his head slowly, as if listening for something just beyond reach. Then he said, "Where is the flyloft accessed from?" "The stairs to your left," she said, pointing, "but no one ever goes up during a performance. It's used only to adjust the scenery." Holmes was already moving. He took the narrow stairs 2 at a time, his steps muffled by the worn carpet. I followed more cautiously, the boards groaning beneath us. As we ascended, the scent of dust thickened, mingled with something metallic. The fly-loft was a cramped corridor above the stage, its beams latticed with ropes and counterweights. Holmes scanned the space with swift economy. "There," he said, indicating a rope pulley with dark smears on its length. "Blood again. Someone came up here, Watson, likely during the blackout between scenes. From above they could reach the curtain unseen. But how did they descend without being spotted?" Holmes pointed toward the corner where a ladder led down into the backstage rigging. An actor in costume, a crewman in black. Any figure seen flitting behind flats would hardly raise alarm in this setting. There was a faint sound, then metal against wood. We both turned sharply. Another creak, then silence. "Who's there?" Holmes called out. No answer. He moved quickly and the lantern held high. I followed, my heart thudding. We rounded the pulley rig to find nothing but a dropped stage hook, swinging gently, ticking against the wall like a quiet metronome. Tension's already begun to unravel, Holmes muttered. Let's descend before someone decides to cut the next cue. Back on the stage, Miss Armitage waited with evident strain. Was someone up there? She asked. Recently? Yes, Holmes said. Tell me, who stood nearest to Mr. Fitz during the second to last scene? The Queen, she said after a moment's thought. Miss Viola Bancroft. She plays Goneril. Holmes nodded. We should speak with her. Immediately. She may be in her dressing room still, Miss Armitage offered, already turning. We followed her through a maze of velvet corridors and painted flats until she stopped before a heavy door marked Miss Bancroft. She knocked. No reply. She knocked again, louder. Viola? Holmes raised a hand and gestured for silence. Inside, a sound barely audible, a scrape, then the unmistakable hiss of a gasp. Holmes threw open the door. Miss Viola Bancroft sat on the floor, knees drawn to her chest, her stage wig still on, makeup streaked. She had dropped a small mirror, which now lay cracked at her feet. Her hands trembled. Please don't, Holmes knelt beside her with unusual gentleness. No one is accusing you of anything, but something frightened you. She nodded, eyes wide. He said he knew. Said he'd tell them all before the curtain fell. Who? She hesitated. Fitz. He said the past wasn't buried, that he'd drop the mask on stage if he had to. Holmes's voice was very quiet. And what mask was that? Viola closed her eyes. He wasn't Lionel Fitz, not really. His name was Marcus Latham. Years ago, he vanished after a scandal. A girl dead, it was never solved, and someone here recognized him. I think so, or he believed so. He was terrified these past few days, kept watching the wings, flinching at sound cues. Holmes stood. Miss Bancroft, did he confide anything else? He said the theatre was the only place a man could lie while telling the truth. Then he handed me this. She reached into her robe and produced a folded note. Holmes read it quickly, then held it out to me. The words were few. Look above the proscenium. The second mask hides the first face. Holmes turned on his heel, already in motion. The same beat, Watson, the same damn cue. Holmes moved with a singular purpose, the slip of paper still clenched in his fingers as we crossed back into the shadowy stage. The wooden boards creaked underfoot, but he paid them no heed. His eyes were already fixed above the proscenium arch, where a row of grotesque theatre masks carved in high relief grinned silently down upon us. Second mask from the left, he said. Do you see it, Watson? I followed his gaze. The masks were weathered, some chipped, some darkened by years of soot. The second bore a comic expression, though one eye had a hollow look, as if the chiseling had been deliberately altered. Holmes stepped onto a nearby riser, seized a long pole used for adjusting lighting, and reached up to tap the mask lightly. The sound it made was different from the others, a dull, padded thud rather than a solid knock. He handed me the pole without a word and leapt from the riser toward the side stairs, leading into the catwalk. Miss Armitage appeared at the stage's edge. What is it? There's something behind that mask, I said. A hollow, possibly a compartment. We waited. Above us, the sound of Holmes's footsteps echoed briefly in the rafters. Then silence, followed by a sharp scraping. A pause. Then the sound of something snapping free. He reappeared moments later, descending with practiced ease, a flat wooden panel tucked under one arm. Its reverse was fitted with a false back. and in that hollow space lay a small parcel wrapped in faded linen, bound with theatre cord and sealed with what appeared to be dried wax. Holmes carried it to the footlights, unwrapped it with careful fingers, and revealed, of all things, a faded photograph, a broken brooch, and a child's drawing in crayon. He examined each item in turn, then placed them upon the stage like relics at an altar. "The face behind the mask," he murmured. "But whose?" I crouched beside him, squinting at the photograph. "That's Fitz. Younger, no beard. And the woman beside him, familiar." "Not just familiar," Holmes said. "That is Miss Viola Bancroft. And the brooch she wears in this photograph looks at the stage tonight. She wore it on her collar. She claimed she knew nothing of Fitz's past." Holmes didn't answer. He held the broken brooch up to the light. "This isn't the original. The clasp is cracked. The one she wore earlier was intact. A replica, perhaps meant to replace this one, which he clearly kept." "And the drawing?" Holmes unfolded it carefully. The paper was brittle, but the image remained of two stick figures, labelled M and V, standing beside a crude drawing of a stage curtain. A heart had been drawn in the corner, half smeared with age. "A child's drawing," I said softly. "But why hide this? Why preserve it above the proscenium?" "Because it was sacred," Holmes said, "and because whoever placed it there did not wish it was found while Fitz lived." A sharp footstep behind us made us turn. Viola stood in the doorway to the wings, hands at her sides. "You found it?" she said quietly. Holmes straightened. "You placed it there?" She nodded once. "Long ago, before he vanished? Before the accident?" "What accident?" I asked. But Holmes held up a hand. "Not yet. Miss Bancroft, may I ask how long did you know Marcus Latham?" "I was 17 when I met him. He was the understudy for Hamlet. I was the prompter's assistant. We were foolish. And the girl who died?" Viola's face blanched. "Clara, a seamstress. Young. Marcus ended things with her cruelly. She drank laudanum one night, left a note that blamed no one, but the newspapers made their assumptions. He fled, changed his name. I never saw him again until he walked on stage 3 months ago as Lear. And you said nothing?" "I didn't know what I felt," she said. "He looked like the ghost of a man I once loved. I thought he'd run again." But he stayed. And then he began to remember. Holmes stepped closer. "And you feared what he might reveal?" She looked at the items on the stage. "I feared he would reveal himself to everyone, and that I would be forced to choose between what he had done and who he had become." "You were not the only one who feared that," Holmes said, lifting the photo. "But someone else believed his silence would not hold." A noise behind us, the curtain stirring. Miss Armitage entered again, this time holding a letter. "This was addressed to Mr. Fitz," she said. "I found it in the mail slot after you went up." Holmes took it and opened the envelope. His brows furrowed as he read. "You do not get to return as if nothing happened. I know who you were. If you say one word, I will show them the truth. One more step, and I swear, curtain or not, you'll fall before the line is spoken. No name, no signature." He folded the note slowly, and thus the motive clarifies. Someone feared not justice, but revelation, the ruin of a reputation, or the reopening of a personal wound. "And the weapon?" I asked. "We've seen no blade," Holmes said, "but the wound suggests a ragged edge, a stage prop, perhaps, something symbolic." He moved back to the corpse, then paused. His gaze was fixed on the base of the curtain rod. There, protruding slightly beneath the folds, was a metal bracket shaped like a talon, jagged at the tip. "A hook," he said, "part of the old curtain mechanism, disused, rusted, and broken." He pulled the velvet aside. The hook was stained dark. "So he wasn't stabbed by a weapon," I breathed. "He was pulled or thrown onto this. Holmes nodded, and someone knew precisely where it was, someone who'd worked this stage for a very long time. A groan echoed from behind the flats. Wood creaked. Holmes turned sharply toward the sound. Holmes was already moving toward the creaking sound before I had fully registered it. His footfalls were light but certain, threading through the maze of painted scenery and prop trunks that flanked the wings. I followed closely, heart thudding, aware once more of the strange silence that had returned to the theatre, the hush between performances, charged with expectation. Another groan, not wood this time human, pained. Holmes rounded a flat painted to resemble a crumbling castle wall and stopped. A man sat slumped against the canvas, clutching his side, his breathing laboured. Greying hair, a once neat waistcoat now flecked with dust and dried blood, and a wrench at his feet. "Stage crew," Holmes said softly. "You're Owen Dre, the carpenter, are you not?" The man gave a nod that was more of a grimace. I didn't mean to begin, then coughed. He pushed me, said he'd speak the truth tonight, said I didn't matter anymore. Holmes crouched beside him. "And so you waited in the wings. Knew his blocking, knew precisely when he'd back into the curtain for his final monologue, and when he did, you guided him backward." Dre's eyes flicked up in panic. He wasn't meant to die. "No," Holmes said quietly. "He was meant to be injured, humiliated perhaps, stopped, but not killed. He ruined everything. 30 years I worked on these boards, built the sets, ran the traps, patched the ropes when they snapped mid-act. And no one knew, not the directors, not the audience. Only him. Only Marcus knew who I was, what I'd done." "And what have you done?" I asked. Dre let his head fall back against the flat. "Clara was my sister." The words hung in the air. "She was delicate," he whispered, "not strong like the others. She stitched hems and cleaned powder from wigs, never asked for anything. Then Marcus led her on, took her to Brighton, left her there with nothing but promises and shame. She came back broken." "And took her life?" I asked. Dre nodded. I found her, still holding the theatre program he gave her. No note, just that. I wanted to kill him then, but he vanished like a bloody ghost. Holmes stood, and when he returned, you didn't recognize him immediately. "Not until last week," Dre said. "The way he moved, the way he spoke, it clicked." And he looked straight at me, and I saw it in his eyes. He knew what I'd lost. And yet he was still going to speak, still going to confess, but not to the police, to the audience, turn it into a performance. He intended to redeem himself theatrically, Holmes said, almost bitterly. To make confession a final act. Dre gave a shuddering breath. I just wanted him to stop. So I waited in the rigging, unbolted the safety bracket, timed it to the blackout, pulled him gently just an inch, just enough to startle. But the hook was rusted, Holmes said, and sharper than you expected. Dre turned his face away. It tore him open like cloth. We stood in silence. Only the faint tap of the stage hook swinging against the wall filled the space. "You must tell the constable," I said. "I know," Dre whispered. "Just let me sit a minute longer." Holmes gave a quiet nod. "No need for handcuffs. He won't run." As we stepped away, the soft rustling of the curtain returned, the motif folding in upon itself again, like the final line of a scene. Holmes spoke only once we were out of earshot. "He spoke the truth, Watson. It was not murder in intent, but manslaughter, surely." "Justice tempered by timing," Holmes said, "and perhaps by the theatre itself. The stage has always been a confessional booth, dressed in velvet." Viola reappeared at the edge of the corridor, her eyes searching Holmes's face. "Was it him?" "It was," Holmes replied. "But not out of hatred, out of grief. Clara was his sister. She covered her mouth." "Oh," Holmes handed her the crayon drawing. "This is what Marcus saved, not a mask, a memory." Her fingers trembled as she took it. "And now?" Holmes looked up at the empty seats, the cold lights. Now the stage is silent, he said. And perhaps for once the silence speaks loudest. A crash shattered the Momenta prop shelf, collapsing somewhere in the darkness behind the curtain. Holmes was already turning toward the sound. Holmes reached the curtain's edge in 3 swift strides, his coat swinging behind him like a shadow. The fallen shelf lay on its side, a clutter of props and paint cans strewn across the narrow backstage passage. A faint trail of powder from a broken rouge compact left a crimson smear along the floorboards like the echo of the blood we had already seen. "Too clumsy for chance," he said. Something or someone intended to interrupt. He crouched beside the wreckage, lifting a single object that had rolled away from the mess, a broken stage mask. The lower half was cracked, the painted grin split like a wound. I stepped forward. Was this among the props earlier? "No," Holmes said. "It doesn't match the current production. The masks in Lear are abstract. This is from another play entirely." Viola had joined us again, her gaze fixed on the broken face in Holmes's hand. "That's from the Mask of Vengeance," she said softly. "We staged it 4 seasons ago." Holmes turned the mask over in his palm. Then someone kept it. He stood, scanning the corridor. "Watson, do you recall the timing of the crash?" Just after Dre's confession, after the emotional current had begun to settle. This was designed to reintroduce disruption. "Another player?" I said, still hiding behind the scenes. Holmes nodded, and one with a sense for drama. We moved back toward the wings. As we did, the faint creak of the curtain rod repeated itself, softer this time, like breath through rust. Holmes's eyes lifted to the arch above us. "The theatre itself has become a character in this tale," he said, always shifting its weight, speaking in sighs. We emerged into the main stage again, where the body of Lionel Fitzmarcus Latham still lay beneath the frozen gaze of the curtain. The constable now stood beside it, hat in hand, gaze respectfully lowered. "I'll send it to the coroner, sir," he said. Holmes nodded. "And keep everyone else out of the building, including the cast. There's only one remaining inside, sir," Miss Armitage offered. "Mr. Julian Pond. He plays Edmund." Holmes's head turned sharply. "And where is Mr. Pond now?" "In the green room, I believe." "I should like a word with him," Holmes said, already striding down the corridor that led backstage again. I followed close, feeling the strange pressure of the theatre's air close in around us. The motif returned, the soft clack of a rope brushing pulleys somewhere above, as though the building itself still remembered where the lines were drawn. The green room was a cramped chamber lined with old photographs and the scent of tobacco. A single gas lamp flickered overhead. Julian Pond sat in a worn armchair, smoking a cigarette with fingers that trembled just slightly. He was young, well-featured, and wore the remnants of his Edmund costume with theatrical indifference. "You've had a dramatic evening," Holmes said. Pond looked up, eyes glassy. "Is it true? Lionel dead?" "It is," Holmes replied. "You knew him well?" "Only professionally," Pond said. He kept to himself. "A bit intense, really," would mutter to himself before curtain. "First I thought it was method acting, then I realized he was talking to someone who wasn't there." "Who?" Pond shrugged. "No idea, just whispering, like someone chasing. Ghosts." Holmes observed him carefully. "And did you know he wasn't who he claimed to be?" A pause. "Then yes. You recognized him?" "I knew Clara," Pond said quietly. "She worked with my mother. I was just a boy, but I remember her funeral. The name Latham was whispered like a curse. When Fitz joined the cast, I saw his face and it all came back. Took me a few days, to be sure." "And you told no one? I didn't want trouble?" Holmes narrowed his eyes. "Yet you kept a prop from a different production, a mask from the Mask of Vengeance." Pond stiffened. "Two?" "Didn't you dropped it backstage?" Holmes said. "Just now." "I only meant to frighten him," Pond snapped. "Make him back down. He said he'd deliver a speech tonight. A real one. Something that would expose everyone. Said he'd rewrite the end of Lear with truth." "And you feared your own connection might be revealed?" Pond stood abruptly. "No one knew Clara like I did. We were close. And I knew what he did, but he vanished, took his guilt and ran. And now he gets to return as if nothing ever happened? Deliver some poetic monologue and redeem himself in front of a full house?" He laughed bitterly. "The theatre forgives Mr. Holmes too easily." Holmes's voice dropped. "So you hid in the rafters, dropped a shelf, broke a mask." "To distract," Pond said. "To delay, not to kill." "But someone else did," Holmes replied. "Someone who acted before you could." There was silence. The rope above creaked again, softly, insistently. Holmes turned to me. "There are too many layers to this performance, Watson. One man died, 2 others bearing guilt, but still one mask unaccounted for." He turned back to Pond. "Tell me, was anyone else aware of Marcus's return?" Pond hesitated. "Yes, the customer. Mrs. Dervish. She saw him first. She worked in the wardrobe when Clara died." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Where is she now?" Pond frowned. "I think she never left the theatre tonight. Said she had mending to do." A click echoed above us. Holmes raised his head. "Back to the wardrobe." Holmes crossed the stage without a word, the rustle of the velvet curtain at our backs fading into the sharper squeak of his boots on the dressing-room tiles. He took the passage to the wardrobe department with the same clipped pace he reserved for surgery, precise, silent, and focused entirely on the next incision. At the end of the corridor, light seeped through the half-closed door of the costume room. We approached slowly. The scent of starch and camphor floated out to meet us, undercut by a fainter trace of lavender soap. Holmes rapped twice with a knuckle and pushed the door open. The room was a dense jungle of fabric gowns hung shoulder to shoulder on rails, feathered capes and military tunics in organized chaos. And in the center of it, seated on a stool beside a half-mended hem, sat a small woman with iron-grey hair and a tape measure draped around her neck. She did not look up. "Mrs. Dervish," Holmes said quietly. "I wondered when you'd come," she replied. Her voice was low and sanded smooth by years of sewing through rehearsals. I heard the crash. Holmes glanced once at the needle poised between her fingers. "You didn't flinch. I've lived through bomb threats, wardrobe fires, and 3 productions of Macbeth," she said, still stitching. "A prop shelf is hardly an omen. I knew the face. Time blurs names but not sins." She tied off the thread and finally raised her eyes. "Marcus Latham. I saw him the night Clara died. He was here." "You saw them argue. I saw him leave." She stood, brushing threads from her apron. "He came backstage in a rage, said she'd threatened to expose him, said he'd lose everything. But when he left, he looked terrified, not angry, like he'd seen something behind her eyes he hadn't expected." Holmes moved to the wardrobe rail, trailing one hand lightly across the shoulders of the costumes. "And when he reappeared as Fitz?" "I nearly dropped my iron," her lips curled in something like a smirk. But I said nothing. "The past has its own timing. Did anyone else know?" I asked. "Perhaps Viola. She's not as forgetful as she pretends. And Dre, certainly. That man never lets go of a grudge." "Did you know about the hook behind the curtain?" Holmes asked. Her gaze darkened. "I mended that curtain 6 months ago. I told them the bracket was a hazard, said it needed removing. No one listened. But someone used it," Holmes said. "And someone else used this," she replied, stepping aside and pulling open the drawer beneath her workbench. Inside lay a stage dagger, not the rubber kind, but a real blade dulled at the edge, still streaked faintly with dark residue. Holmes raised an eyebrow. Where did you find it? In the props basket. Someone slipped it back after the performance. He picked it up with a handkerchief and studied the handle. The blood on Fitz's sleeve came from the arm wound, ragged, torn by the hook. But there was also a mark on his neck, small, precise, hidden under makeup. This would match. Mrs. Dervish's hands clenched. So Dre didn't kill him? Dre wounded him, Holmes said, but someone else ensured the wound became fatal. A silence settled over the room. Two murderers? I asked, unaware of one another. Holmes tilted his head, or one accomplice, one opportunist. Someone who seized the moment to ensure silence. Then who? I asked. Holmes glanced at the rack again, then reached in and removed a costume, a jester's tunic, rich with bells and frayed ribbons. This wasn't used in Lear, he said. Mrs. Dervish looked at it. That's from the Mask of Vengeance. Julian Pond wore it. Holmes turned it inside out. Tucked into the lining was a slip of paper stiff, like a folded program cue. He unfolded it and read aloud, "The fool sees all but speaks last. Silence is the final act." I stepped closer. A threat? Or a signature? Holmes said. Julian meant to distract, but someone else took advantage of the chaos. He turned to Mrs. Dervish, who knew. The blocking that placed Fitz before the curtain. "Everyone," she said. "It's been the same staging for 3 weeks. And who had the opportunity to be alone with the props?" She hesitated. "Only the understudy." Holmes's eyes sharpened. "There's an understudy for Lear?" "Of course," she said. "Every major part has one, but tonight he called in sick." "What's his name?" "Samuel Greaves." Holmes froze. "Watson," he said. "Was that not the name on the list we saw posted in the lobby of the cast program?" "Yes, but not under Lear." "Exactly," Holmes said. "He wasn't listed at all." A single echoing clang rang out from the rafters above us. Holmes dropped the costume, too late for the final cue. The clang reverberated through the theatre like the final bell of a doomed act. Holmes was already through the door, his footfalls colliding with the wooden slats in rhythm with the fading echo above. I struggled to keep pace, breath catching against the sharp cold now creeping down from the rafters. "Samuel Greaves," Holmes said under his breath, a name that appeared nowhere tonight but left its fingerprint on everything. "How does an actor vanish from his own stage?" I called after him. "He doesn't," Holmes replied. "He hides within the play." We burst back into the wings, just as Miss Armitage and the constable emerged from the house. Viola Bancroft stood beside the proscenium arch, trembling. "There's someone above the grid," she said, moving quickly. I heard the floor groan. Holmes turned to the constable. "Seal the exits, no one leaves, and send 2 men up the scaffolding, quietly. If he hears pursuit, he'll drop like a sandbag." The constable nodded and barked the order down the corridor. Holmes turned to Viola. "You worked with Samuel Greaves." "Briefly. He was cast as Edmund's understudy last season. Quiet, pale, always watching. He came back this month, said he'd been hired to understudy Lear. But no such appointment was ever formalized." "No." She glanced upward, "but he was here every night." Holmes scanned the curtain. "He's rewritten his part, Watson, inserted himself into the production without a role, without lines, only cues. That is the mark of obsession." We crossed to the far side of the stage, past the blood-stained velvet. The ropes leading to the fly system hung like limp marionettes, swaying faintly as if from some breath above. The sound returned a tug, a low creak, then silence. Holmes paused and whispered, "Listen." Another beat, then tap, creak, slide. He looked at me. He's improvising. Watching the scene shift below and adjusting the final act. "Is he armed?" I asked. "I doubt it," Holmes said. "He's not here for murder, not truly. He's here to end something, likely himself." We moved to the side ladder that led toward the gantry. The climb was narrow, the metal chilled to the touch. With each step, the ropes beside us groaned like ancient chorus lines. At the top, Holmes stopped just before the final rung and held up a hand. There, seated on the edge of the grid above the stage, legs dangling just inches from the curtain rig, sat a man in a stagehand's black coat. He held something in his lap-thin, worn and shaking. A mask, not painted, not carved. It was made of paper. Plain, theatre program pages stiffened with starch and string. "You were never cast," Holmes said softly, still one step below the ledge. The man turned. His eyes were sharp, haunted, his hair wild beneath the gaslight's flicker. "I was always watching," he said, "always waiting for my line. You're Samuel Greaves. I'm everyone no one saw." His voice broke half laugh, half sob. He came back, walked on stage like the curtain had never closed. And I thought, now he'll speak. He said he would, but he didn't. Greaves looked down at the stage below. He delayed, postponed. He's behind the character, like always. Lear was just another mask. "And so you made one," Holmes said gently. Greaves held the paper mask tighter. "I wore this beneath the lights once, during the Mask of Vengeance. I played the fool, no lines, just movement. But I saw it all. I saw Marcus, then called Lionel, watching Viola every night. Saw her flinch, saw the brooch she stopped wearing." He looked down at the boards below. "And Clara?" Holmes asked. A pause. "She was my cousin." The silence that followed was thick and final. Holmes said, "You didn't kill him." Greaves didn't move. "You left the note," Holmes continued, "slipped the message under our door. You wanted it exposed. But someone else struck the blow. I only wanted him to confess," Greaves whispered. "Truth on stage, one last scene. But when he didn't," I said, "I gave him the paper mask," he said. "Slid it into his dressing room an hour before curtain, with the line written across it. 'The fool sees all but speaks last,'" Holmes recited. Greaves nodded. "I thought he'd wear it. As a symbol, make it part of the act. Instead, he stuffed it in his pocket." "You waited above the grid during Act 5, Holmes said. "In case. I thought maybe I'd pull a rope, drop a cue, frighten him into speaking. But then I saw the blood, heard the audience gasp, and I knew someone else had written the ending." Holmes took a cautious step up. "Samuel, the curtain's fallen. The scene is over." The man let the paper mask drop from his hand. It fluttered down, landing silently atop the velvet where the blood had dried. From below came a soft gasp. Viola had seen it fall. "I don't want to go back to the world," Greaves whispered. Holmes extended a hand, "Then come back to the truth." The theatre creaked once more, a slow, aching groan of wood and tension. Greaves reached out. Holmes's fingers clasped Samuel Greaves's wrist with the same quiet precision he used to lift evidence from a crime scene, neither forceful nor tentative, simply inescapable. Greaves allowed himself to be pulled to his feet, the boards beneath him creaking in protest. "You don't understand," he murmured. "They all let it happen. Clara was a ghost before she died. He destroyed her, and the theatre applauded. Holmes didn't release him. And yet you brought us here, not to kill, but to uncover. I didn't think anyone would come." "You were counting on it," Holmes said. "That's why the note was scented. Jasmine faint, but intentional. A stage trick. It sticks in the mind. You mimicked a woman's writing and scent to increase urgency." Greaves gave a bitter smile. "Performance." Holmes guided him down the first few rungs of the ladder, the final one. Below us, the paper mask still rested on the velvet, unmoved. Viola remained at the curtain's edge, her eyes fixed upward, though whether on the mask or the man descending, I could not say. As we reached the stage level, the constable stepped forward, But Holmes raised a hand. "Take him gently," he said. This was not his blade. Greaves made no protest as he was led away. The ropes beside the stage swayed once more, disturbed not by motion, but by conclusion. I felt the shift in weight, the turning of the key in the lock of the theatre's breath. Holmes stood silent, then turned to Miss Armitage. "Is there a register of all cast and crew going back to the production of The Mask of Vengeance?" "In the office," she said. "Filed with payroll. Fetch it, please." She nodded and disappeared into the corridor. I stepped to Holmes's side. "You don't believe we've seen the end?" "I believe we've seen the penultimate act," he replied. "The death, the grief, the confession. But not the motive in its full light. But we've heard the names Clara, Marcus, and Greaves. We've understood the triangle." "No," Holmes said, "we've understood the tragedy, but not the crime." Miss Armitage returned with a leather binder which Holmes accepted and flipped through briskly. His finger stopped at a page. "Here, Clara Greaves, seamstress, paid for 14 weeks. But look, she ceased work 1 week before the production closed. Suicide? Possibly. Or something else forced her departure." He turned the page, and here Samuel Greaves. Then a teenager listed as an unpaid assistant. He flipped further. "Mrs. Dervish?" I said. "She was working in the wardrobe even then, yes," Holmes murmured. "And she's been silent." We moved swiftly back toward the costume room. This time Holmes didn't knock. He entered like a man returning to a page he'd left degeared. Mrs. Dervish looked up from her work table. She was snipping thread, her movements calm. Holmes placed the register in front of her. "Have you seen this? Many times. You remember Clara's last day?" "Vividly." "Tell us," he said. She didn't look up. She came in late, hair disheveled, pale, said nothing, just worked. But she winced when she lifted the gowns. "I noticed bruises." "And did you speak to her?" I asked who had hurt her. She said it was no one's fault but hers. Holmes's voice sharpened. "And after that day?" "She didn't come back." He waited. "And?" Mrs. Dervish exhaled. "Marcus was furious that evening. Not drunk, just enraged, pacing backstage like a caged dog. When he found out she'd been dismissed, he stormed out." "Dismissed?" I asked. "I thought she left." Mrs. Dervish met my gaze. She was let go, quietly, on the stage manager's orders. Holmes froze. "And who was stage manager then?" She hesitated. "Say it," Holmes said. "Owen Dray." The name struck like a dropped sandbag. "Watson," Holmes said, already walking. "We've been too merciful." We returned to the prop corridor. Dray sat on a bench outside the constable's supervision, a blanket around his shoulders, eyes distant. Holmes knelt before him. "Tell me the truth, Mr. Dray. Not the grief-stricken brother, not the wronged stagehand. The truth." Dray blinked. "I told you." "No. You told us Marcus seduced Clara, broke her heart and vanished. But that's not why she died." Silence. Holmes's voice dropped. "You hurt her." Dray didn't move. "She tried to leave the theatre. She confronted Marcus, and you saw it. You assumed betrayal. You followed her, and that night you struck her." Still no reply. Holmes pressed on, the bruises, the silence, the dismissal. "You told the manager she was unstable, that she should be let go. And when she died, Marcus bore the guilt because he believed he caused it." Dray looked up then. "He did cause it." "No," Holmes said, "you did. But he took the role, and you let him perform it for 30 years. Dray's face twisted. "I thought I could live with it. But when he returned, I couldn't bear it." Watching him walk those boards with the crowd cheering, as if he had earned their love. "You didn't kill him," Holmes said softly. "You executed a scene written long ago." The ropes above us creaked one final time, swaying without wind. Holmes rose. "And now," he said, "the curtain can fall." A distant bell rang once, faintly, Holmes did not move as the bell's tone faded. His gaze remained fixed on Dre's hollow expression, as though reading the final lines of a play long withheld. No handcuffs, no accusation shouted, just the silence of a truth at last acknowledged. "You never confessed," Holmes said quietly. "Not to Clara, not to Marcus. You let your guilt age into blame." Dre's voice came low, like a splintered floorboard. She was crying. She said she loved him. I couldn't hear it again. I grabbed her arm. She stumbled. That's all. It wasn't meant to. "You let the world believe she took her own life," Holmes said, "and let Marcus believe he had driven her to it. That guilt broke him, and you watched him carry it." "I thought it would be enough," Dre whispered. "It never is," Holmes replied. The constable stepped forward, uncertain. Holmes gave a small nod. Dre rose without resistance, the blanket falling away like a costume abandoned in the wings. As he was led out, his footfalls echoed against the boards, heavy final. I exhaled. "So it was never murder," I said. "Not in the beginning." "No," Holmes said. "Only grief redirected, pain recast, a chorus of unfinished lines." We stood in the center of the stage once more. The air had shifted. The bloodstain on the curtain had darkened to near black, indistinct now but persistent, as though the theatre itself had absorbed the scene into memory. Viola approached slowly, her hand brushing the fringe of the velvet. "He never got to speak," she said. "That final monologue, the one he promised me." "He performed it," Holmes said, "just not in words. Every movement, every breath tonight was his confession." She lowered her head. "And the mask?" "Greaves gave it to him," I said, "a silent accusation." "Or a plea." Holmes turned to her. "You knew, didn't you, that Marcus wasn't the villain of Clara's story?" "I suspected," she said, "but suspicion is easier than truth." "Then you let silence speak," Holmes replied. She flinched. Holmes looked upward toward the rafters. "It is strange, Watson, how often the stage reveals the soul more than the confessional. Every man wears a mask, but some forget where the theatre ends." The ropes shifted again above us, and the curtain creaked softly, as if cued to close. "Will the theatre reopen?" I asked. "In time," Viola said, "after the blood is washed, after the curtain is mended." Holmes gave a faint smile. "You'll need a new hook." She managed a weak laugh. Miss Armitage entered from stage right, holding a sheaf of crumpled papers. "These were in Mr. Fitz's dressing room. I thought you might want to see." Holmes took them and sifted through the first few pages. Typed, annotated. Lines from King Lear interspersed with handwritten additions. He paused at one. "Not with madmen's cries, but silence thick with memory. That shall be my closing." "Not Shakespeare?" I said. "No," Holmes replied, his own words. He handed the paper to Viola. "Here's your monologue." She took it gently, as if the pages might disintegrate. Her fingers traced the margins, and for a moment her mouth moved as if rehearsing it silently. Holmes stepped away from the footlights toward the empty house. "Will you stay?" I asked. "A moment longer," he said. "There is still one more line to hear." I stood beside him as he looked out over the vacant seats. A single program lay open on the front row, forgotten. The theatre's name, the Royal, gleamed faintly under the gaslight. Holmes's voice dropped. "Watson, do you recall what he said in the letter Greaves showed us? Theatre is the only place a man can lie while telling the truth." "Yes. But it's only half the line. The other half is this, only when the truth is unbearable." The creak came again. Not from the rafters, but beneath our feet. Holmes stepped back and knelt near the trapdoor beside center stage. It had shifted slightly, barely perceptible. He pressed his fingers along the edge and lifted. Below, tucked among dust and discarded props, was a single object, a mirror, oval, cracked in the centre, its edges browned with age. Holmes lifted it gently. He meant to use this, he said, not for vanity, for revelation. How? Holmes turned the mirror so I could see. On the back was etched a message, faint but legible beneath the grime. What we see on stage is never half so true as what we see when we turn our backs to it. He handed it to me. He meant to hold this as he spoke, a final gesture, a reflection to the audience and to himself. A gust of wind from the open gantry brushed the curtain again. We both looked up. The mask was gone. Holmes did not flinch as he stared up at the vacant rigging. The paper mask, once a symbol of suppressed memory and unseen grief, had vanished without a whisper, taken either by a stray draught or by the theatre itself, as though it had decided to swallow one final prop before the lights went dark. It was never meant to remain, he said. A gesture, not a relic. I turned the mirror over once more, tracing the etched phrase with my thumb. Do you believe he would have gone through with it? The confession? The truth? He had already begun, Holmes said. He slipped that note beneath our door. He left clues in plain sight, props placed, lines redacted, gestures reframed. All of it was a rehearsal for redemption, and yet someone ensured it became a requiem. Holmes nodded toward the curtain. The real tragedy is not that he died, Watson, it's that he was interrupted before he could finish the line. A shift behind us, Viola. She had stepped onto the stage with hesitant grace, as though unsure whether the drama had ended or merely paused. I think he wrote something more, she said, just before the final act. There was a torn page left in the green room. I didn't want to read it then. I thought it was part of his script. She extended a folded scrap. Holmes opened it carefully. The handwriting was Fitz's deliberate, precise, like a man restraining tremors with discipline. To speak without forgiveness is to summon ghosts, but if I speak tonight, it is not to beg nor to confess, but to set her name, Claire, upon the stage one last time. Viola lowered her eyes. He wasn't just seeking absolution, he was giving her a curtain call. Holmes nodded. Every actor hopes to be remembered for a final performance. He chose one without applause. The constable reappeared at the foot of the house steps, looking uncharacteristically hesitant. "Beg pardon, sir, but there's someone outside asking for you." Holmes glanced at me. "Not the press, I hope?" "No, sir. A woman, name of Margaret Latham." Viola's breath caught. "His wife?" "No," Holmes said. "His sister." We followed the constable into the lobby. The house doors had been opened, and through the veil of gaslight and mist stood a tall woman in a modest travelling cloak. Her face bore the unmistakable structure of the man we had known as Lionel Fitz, but her expression was firmer, more composed. "Mr. Holmes," she said, "I received a telegram. It said my brother was dead." Holmes bowed slightly. "Yes, Miss Latham, I'm afraid. The curtain fell on him tonight." She stepped closer. "Did he suffer?" "No," I said gently. "He fell during a scene. It was quick, but not without weight." Holmes held out the torn page. "He left this." She read it slowly. Her lips moved over the word Clara. Her eyes moistened but did not spill over. "I always hoped he'd speak her name again," she said. "He never did. Not after Brighton. Not after the funeral." It was as though he'd struck her from the script of his life. "He didn't," Holmes said. "He built a role around her absence." She looked up. "Will they remember him kindly?" Holmes paused. "They will remember him truthfully." She gave a faint nod. "Then that is enough." As she turned to go, her foot brushed something on the floor, a crumpled square of paper caught beneath the doorframe. Holmes bent and retrieved it. The mask. Flattened now, the creases worn soft, but intact. Holmes held it up between thumb and forefinger. Not taken by the wind, then, I said. No, Holmes said. Dropped. As though the theatre knew its final cue. He turned toward the stage behind us. The house was empty now, save for Viola, still motionless in the wings, and the constable standing respectfully beside the closed curtain. Holmes walked back into the theatre. We followed. He moved to the centre of the stage and placed the mask gently on the ground. No flair, no flourish, just reverence. "Watson," he said, "do you hear it?" I listened. The ropes above had gone still. The curtain no longer creaked. The footlights hissed low, steady. The theatre had settled. "There is no sound," I whispered. Holmes turned to me. "Exactly, the line has been spoken," and then just before the gaslight dimmed, there came a single, unmistakable cue, a quiet knock from beneath the trapdoor. Holmes crouched beside the trapdoor, fingertips grazing the worn brass ring. The knock had been unmistakable, soft, deliberate, no louder than a page being turned. I moved beside him, my breath caught in my throat. "It couldn't be," I began. "It isn't the dead," Holmes replied, voice low, "but someone who wished to remain hidden until the very last cue." He gripped the handle, paused only briefly, then lifted the hatch. The hinges creaked, dry with disuse. Beneath lay a narrow crawl-space utility void between stage and orchestra pit, lined with discarded ropes, prop trunks, and the smell of dust-laden history. From the shadows emerged a figure. Slowly, carefully. Her hands came first, slender, aged, work-worn. Then her face, emerging like a phantom from the wings of some forgotten play. "Mrs. Dervish," Holmes said. She straightened, not blinking against the gaslight. "I heard everything," she said, "from the moment you entered." "You were never sewing," Holmes murmured. "You staged your absence, hide before the last act." "I knew the ghosts would come calling," she said. "I wanted to see who would answer." Viola had stepped forward, pale and silent. "Why?" I asked. "Why hide? Why not speak?" "Because I already had, Mrs. Dervish said. 30 years ago." Holmes narrowed his eyes. "You were the one who dismissed Clara." She met his gaze. "Yes, why? I saw the bruises, I asked the questions. But when she refused to name him, refused even to cry, I knew it would destroy her to remain. I begged the manager to let her go quietly. I thought I was protecting her." "But you weren't," Holmes said. "You were protecting the theatre." She flinched. "Yes." "You saw the curtain as sacred," he said. "Nothing must stain it, not scandal, not sorrow." "I was wrong," she whispered. "The stain came anyway." Holmes studied her, then asked, "Why the trapdoor?" "Because it was the one place left untouched. Actors fear it bad luck, old superstitions. I used to keep spare gowns there during the war. Tonight, I simply listened." Viola stepped closer. "You let the mask fall." Mrs. Dervish nodded. I owed him that. A final cue. Holmes looked down at the stage beneath his feet. "This theatre has kept secrets far too long." He turned to the constable. "See that Mrs. Dervish gives a full account. No charges, only record." The man nodded and guided her gently away. Her footsteps were nearly silent. The curtain no longer swayed. The theatre held its breath as though awaiting one last note. I glanced at Holmes. "Do you believe it's finished?" He shook his head. "Only now do we understand the story, but the audience must still hear it." Viola looked down at the page in her hand, the monologue Marcus had written. "I'll read it," she said, "at tomorrow's matinee, before the curtain rises." Holmes's expression softened. "Let them hear Clara's name." And his. She nodded once. The gaslights dimmed again, and for a moment we stood on an empty stage, wrapped in silence. Then, from behind us, the curtain shivered. Not from a gust, nor from movement, but from the softest of sounds, a single bell, rung from the wings. The bell's chime, faint yet perfectly timed, echoed like a memory held just a moment too long. Holmes turned his head toward the wings but did not move. No need. We both understood by now the theatre itself had become conscious of the story it was telling, and like all great dramas, it wished to conclude on its own terms. "A call to close," I said, softly. Holmes gave a slow nod, or perhaps a curtain's bow to those who remained. Viola stepped forward onto the centre of the stage, her footsteps balanced between reverence and resolve. She still held the torn monologue, its edges now softened by touch. She looked out across the darkened rows of seats, their velvet backs turned into silent sentinels. Holmes stepped beside her. "You have the final word." "It should have been his," she said. "It is," Holmes replied, "through you." She unfolded the page. The theatre seemed to still be around her, as if the very boards waited for the voice that would lift memory into meaning. And then clearly she read, "This stage has carried lies and laughter. I gave it both, but tonight I offer it only one truth, that I loved and was loved, that I lost and deserved to lose, that the name I speak now is not mine. Clara, Clara, Clara." The name settled in the empty space like dust returning to shelves long undisturbed. No one moved, not the constable in the wings, not Mrs. Dervish in the far shadows, not even Holmes. Viola folded the paper and placed it gently atop the paper mask, which still lay at centre stage like an offering. Then she stepped back. "That's all there was," she said. Holmes said nothing. He didn't need to. Outside, the sound of a distant carriage reminded me the world still spun. Somewhere in Soho, lights glowed in taverns and laughter echoed in alleys. But here, beneath the proscenium, time had folded in on itself. "We've reached the end," I said. Holmes looked at the curtain, now still, no longer bleeding nor breathing. "No," he said. "We reached silence after the end." I let the words settle before I asked, "What will become of the theatre?" "It will reopen," Viola said, "with a different name." Holmes turned. "What name?" She smiled faintly. "The Clara House." He gave a single approving nod. "Then it will honour what it could not protect." She stepped down into the wings. One by one, the others followed the constable, Mrs. Dervish, the young actor Pond, even Greaves, escorted with quiet dignity. The house emptied like a dream, retracting its breath. Holmes and I remained. "Tell me, Holmes," I said, "was there a case in your memory that ended with fewer facts but more truth?" He folded his hands behind his back. "Facts inform the report. But truth belongs to the stage." A long moment passed. "Will you write it up?" he asked me then unexpectedly. I wasn't sure. "You should," he said, "but not as a case, not as a deduction. Write it as theatre, as a memory, as something Clara herself might have understood." I nodded. He walked once more across the stage, stopping just beneath the spot where the second mask had once hung. He looked up. "I suspect," he said, "that for the first time in its long, ghost-laced history, this theatre may finally sleep." With that, we exited. No fanfare, no closing line, just the soft brush of a curtain against the floor as the door shut behind us.